Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 156 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to ask@nonmonogamyhelp.com and they'll either be read in the podcast or the column anonymously, or spoken rather. Anyway, if you want to read all the columns and listen to the podcast, so you can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com, sign up to early emails by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com/email, and you can follow the podcast on X and Instagram at nonmonogamyhelp, though I'm not really on X very much anymore, and on TikTok at nonmonohelp. You can also get everything and support the column and do the podcast support tier if you really want to by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com/subscribe. And if you join the podcast shout out tier, I will, with your permission, read your name at the end of the podcast. Before we get to this week's question, I'm going to go to the discussion question. Every week before I read the question that people ask me, I put forth the discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, or anyone to get to know them a little bit more. And I very, very much messed up the segment, but that's fine. This week's discussion question is an Otter Being polyamory conversation card question. These are really interesting conversation cards that are more polyamory related than some of the discussion questions that I've put forward. And they're super interesting. So you can get them at nonmonogamyhelp.com/cards. And you can get 10% off using code NONMONOHELP at checkout. So this week's discussion question is, in what way would you like to be supported when you experience jealousy? This is actually an interesting question because I feel like the advice that a lot of people give when it comes to jealousy is almost always like, talk to your partner about it, talk to your partner about it. And I don't necessarily always think that that's the best idea because it really depends on where the jealousy is coming from and what it is that you're feeling and why. Sometimes I think that it's a little bit easier actually to learn how to self-soothe, to speak to friends and stuff. And like a good example of this is if you're in a long distance relationship and, you know, your partner is visiting other people and has other partners locally where they are, you're going to feel jealous of that, and there's not really anything else your partner can do about that, and they likely also, even if you don't have other partners, still miss you. So in that case, I would be like, I don't know, is that you should necessarily go to your partner and talk about it, because the little time that you have together actually it's worth actually being in the moment with each other rather than focusing on the time you're apart while you're together, if that makes sense. So it really depends on where the jealousy is coming from. But I think in terms of support, I think I just try to ask, rather than just going to my partner and saying, I'm jealous. I try, in the past, I've struggled to even ask for basic help, but I try to specify what it is that I need rather than going to my partner with an emotion, because I think that that is actually a lot better. Like if I feel a little bit nervous, like I get a lot of gender feels sometimes about, you know, who my partners date and whether or not I'm as fun or as exciting or as good enough, you know, all that sorts of things, which is going to happen. I will, instead of like going, I'm jealous of this, I'll just say, you know, what is it about our relationship that is exciting? And I can just be honest. It can be like, you know, I'm a little bit worried that I'm not a big partier. Is that okay for you? Like, and then I hear from them about like what value they have in our relationship, and that helps a lot. And sometimes I found actually that instead of trying to get reassurance from my partner when I feel nervous or jealous, one thing that I did a lot, which is a practice I think is really helpful, is actually like a gratitude practice accidentally without me meaning it, is I will write, I used to buy like loads of cards, like romantic cards for my partner. And then whenever I felt those kind of like nervous feelings or jealous feelings or anxious, I would write them a letter in the card, and it would make me reflect about like all the things I was grateful for with them and all of the things that we did that week. Like it was a really good way of like refocusing my brain on some of the good stuff. You know, it's that sort of thing of telling your anxious brain, you know, it goes, what happens if everything goes wrong? And then you kind of ask, well, what happens if everything goes right? And sometimes that does trip it and makes it go, oh, let's focus on this. This is interesting. Let's think about this for a minute. Doesn't always work. But I think, yeah, I kind of prefer to support myself and then ask specifically for the things that I need. So yeah, that is the discussion question. In what way would you like to be supported when you experience jealousy? Let's get to this week's question.
You know, I've primarily been in monogamous relationships. However, those monogamous relationships have often failed because I've cheated. And I've in the past wanted to learn more about non-monogamy and polyamory so that I could, not cheat on people, so that I could be open and honest. And I've usually had monogamous partners who do not want that. And so it hasn't been compatible and worked out. Now I finally have, I finally have a partner who's amazing. I mean, those partners were amazing too, but who wants to be in an open relationship. But it is technically new to the both of us in that neither of us has ever been in an honest, open relationship. Like he's only suppressed his desires and ended a monogamous relationship to start something new with someone. And I've only cheated on someone and, started something up with someone, blah, blah, blah. So we're trying to be each other's primary partners. We're about 6 months since our first date, and we're about 3 months since we had a talk about being each other's primary partners. And, we've just been trying to figure it out. And I got your book from the library. I loved it so much that I ended up buying it. And now I want to buy your workbook as well. And I listened to your podcast. And I guess some things that you should know about me are that I have diagnosed ADHD and depression and anxiety. I do a lot of work and self-care for that stuff. And I'm in therapy weekly with an amazing therapist who's supportive of open relationships. And I guess I just feel like maybe it's because of my ADHD and my need to learn as much as I can about something and kind of do it really well and be the best. But I feel like trying to be in this open, non-monogamous relationship is taking up too much of my brain space. And I just feel like it's all I'm thinking about and kind of almost obsessing about, reading about it and learning about it and trying to basically get a PhD in non-monogamy. So I'd love your advice on how to not let it become the main thing in my life and relationships.
Before we get to this week's answer, I want to quickly remind you of this episode's sponsor, BetterHelp. Quite often in my column and my podcast, I encourage people to seek a polyamory-friendly therapist. And for a lot of people, looking locally for a therapist who may be supportive of polyamory can be impossible or out of their budget. BetterHelp allows you to find therapists online that you can send messages to at any time of day. And they do also offer some financial aid. You can get 10% off your first month by using the promo code non-monogamy-help at checkout or by going to betterhelp.com/non-monogamy-help. Let's get to this week's answer. So you actually had a 2-part question, and I'll get to the next part of it in episode 158. But for the first part, it's focused mostly on not becoming obsessed. And the thing that I want to say, I kind of feel like you've kind of asked the wrong person in a way, because I don't have ADHD, but I am on the autistic spectrum, and I do get special interests, and I get really, really into subjects. And one of the reasons why I got into my column and my podcast and writing about non-monogamy was because I did do a lot of research. Sexual health more so became a special interest of mine, and I started reading all about it. I started listening to podcasts all about it, and I've had a lot of special interests. I was, for a short period of time, I thought I really wanted to be a death doula, which is somebody that supports a person who is terminally ill or is going to die, and is kind of giving them support about how do they get their legal affairs in order and emotional support and stuff like that. So I am kind of obsessed still a little bit with encouraging people to think about, writing an advance directive. If you're in the US and you haven't written an advance directive, see, again, I have this special interest. Please make sure you do, make sure your family and loved ones know what you want to happen to you after your death. Talking about death is important. Talking about sex doesn't make you pregnant. Talking about death won't kill you. See, that's a thing. I'm obsessed with nutrition and fitness and misinformation about fitness. I listen to a lot of podcasts about science misinformation. I'm more focused on the nutrition science aspect of it. And anytime someone says something, I'll be I know about this, blah, 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 and I'll just offload onto them. So like you're kind of asking the wrong person, because my initial reaction to your question is like, what's wrong with that? Like, because I actually have made references and jokes about the polyamory PhD, and that is what I refer to as like whenever like just go on the polyamory subreddit, go on any non-monogamy subreddit, or maybe it's just Reddit, but generally speaking, when someone's like, I'm really interested in non-monogamy, where do I start? And everyone just gives them like this reading list, and they're like, you need to read for 6 months before you try anything. And I actually disagree heavily with that. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm putting together and will hopefully finish, by the time I publish this, maybe it'll be finished, a polyamory course for people who are just starting out. And it's, if you go to polyamoryfasttrack.com, it's designed to help people get started right away, because I do think there are practical, realistic things that you can do right away that don't require you to get your polyamory PhD. So I don't think that it's necessarily a problem that you're reading about this. I actually think that it's really helpful, and but I don't necessarily think that everyone needs to read loads. I say that as someone who's written a book. I want people to read my book, but I don't think that it's required. And I don't think the only thing that I would hesitate with you is make sure that you're not being suckered into a false sense of security that by reading all of this information, you're somehow going to prevent yourself from feeling. And that is the problem that I find mostly with the polyamory PhD and in my own experience. Like, I was a super nerd. I read everything. I spent a lot of years in sex advice communities giving people sexual health advice. That led to learning more about things like swinging, things like non-monogamy. And then I started learning more about that. And I felt like I knew so much because I'd been in all of these communities and I'd read all these scenarios and I'd thought about it a lot. But thinking about things is very different to the emotional realities of actually experiencing those things. And, in the same way that, you can read loads about having a child, you can read loads, and I'm not a parent, but everything that every parent has told me has also reflected this. It's okay to prepare, but there is an emotional reality of that situation that you aren't really necessarily going to be able to prepare yourself beforehand until it actually happens to you. So I think that as long as you have a realistic outlook on this, as long as you are like, okay, I'm reading this because I want to be informed, I want to know about things, I want to figure it out, I'm starting this new thing. And please understand that you've spent your whole life, like you grew up in a monocentric society, and you've spent your whole life kind of digesting and processing information about monogamy. You just haven't intentionally been doing it. Right? Like, you've seen monogamy represented in almost every single form of media since you were very, very little. Most of us, especially if we were socialized and seen as women in society, were encouraged to think about, you play that MASH game of like who you're going to marry, what house you're going to live in, what's your wedding going to be like all of these sorts of things have us thinking about and theoretically planning for monogamy. And so you've probably spent way more time in your life getting your monogamy PhD than you have getting your polyamory PhD. And so now you're trying to almost kind of balance it out a little bit, learn more about it. I don't think it's a problem. And I think that you should just allow yourself a little bit of grace in getting through this, but be realistic with yourself and say like, okay, reading all this stuff isn't necessarily going to mean that I am going to be totally prepared and I'm not going to have any issues. Like, everybody has issues. Everybody comes to relationships, whether they're monogamous, polyamorous, it doesn't matter. Everyone comes to relationships with quote unquote baggage. I hate the word baggage. I don't think it's helpful because I think it encourages the idea that everyone doesn't have baggage in a way, but everybody comes to relationships with the relational effects of what they've grown up with. And there's so much out there like that demonstrates that a lot of people, I don't want to say that people were bad parents, because I think that a lot of people have done the best they could with the cards they were dealt. But I do think that it's not commonplace in most of the societies that I've grown up in, and, different families can be different, but it's not really commonplace for people to learn emotional regulation. It's not really commonplace for people to learn some of the skills that would really help them in any kind of a relationship. And that's because people aren't necessarily taught these things. And also because people are taught things which don't help our emotional regulation. So, everybody, I think, regardless of whether or not they're trying polyamory or not, could do with a little bit of education on relationships. It's actually what I think home ec should be or sex ed should be. I don't think it should just be about like how to use a condom. It should be about understanding relationships, understanding how to talk to your partner, understanding how to ask for what you need, understanding how to say no. Like there's so many things that we're not necessarily taught. So I think that it's okay to spend a little bit of time learning about that, as long as you don't just believe that learning about it is going to protect you in a way, and be open to experiencing those ups and downs of emotion. Because I think a lot of the times the biggest kind of mistakes that I see people make when they're starting out is just trying so hard to prevent negative emotions from happening and trying to control every aspect of the situation to the point where it causes more negative emotions than if they just let go of that. So yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I will, however, point out that personally, this is just me, I'm not trying to be a dick about it, I do think that sometimes people can become, and this isn't just in polyamory, this is like, it can be anything. It can even be the gym, to be honest. It can be anything. People kind of allow one aspect of something they're interested in to subsume their entire personality. And you know what? If they're happy with that, it's none of my business. One of the reasons why I don't really like polyamory communities, and why I don't like a lot of communities, to be fair, like I don't tend to like single identity communities, to be honest with you. And that's because I find it quite boring and not very relatable to just be talking about polyamory all the time, to just be talking about being queer all the time. There's so many communities that I've been in where it's just like, this is all that we talk about and all that the other people talk about. And it gets really too much for me. And I don't personally like that. Now, some people really dig that. Like some people, I'm not a person who identifies as polyamorous. Like I don't feel it's necessarily super part of my identity, but I do identify as being queer. But still, I find I don't necessarily believe that just because I'm polyamorous and someone else is polyamorous, that we have enough in common to necessitate a community. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I don't think that's true of queerness either. Like, to be honest, I don't think that just because we share that experience, it means even other non-binary people, like it's just one aspect of who I am. And I don't particularly like being almost drilled down to just that aspect. That's how I personally feel. I do think that different people are going to be on different journeys at different times in their life. And I do think that when you're new to polyamory, and sometimes when you're kind of getting a foothold in an identity and you're kind of learning to accept it and understanding yourself and all these sorts of things, I do think sometimes those single identity communities can be really helpful because you need and want to feel not alone in your identity. And that's very understandable. And I totally think that if you are for a short period of time a little bit obsessed with polyamory and a little bit, it's subsuming your life slightly, I don't think that is abnormal. I think that's actually quite typical because something that is not talked about in the mainstream, something that you can't just like turn on a film and see, it's going to be something that you're like, okay, I want to be in this for a little bit of time. And I don't think that everybody needs to be at the same point of their journey at the same time. And, there are some people who their polyamory is like a big, deep part of who they are. And being in these communities really gives them a lot of social support and gives them a lot of, it gives them something in their life that they're missing. And that is totally valid. For me, other communities give me that. And I enjoy more the diversity, to be honest, of different people and different interests and learning new things. Like that's more of something that gives me fulfillment. And I'm not necessarily that fulfilled by those other communities. So yeah, I'd say that it's pretty normal to have polyamory be something that you're focused on. I also think, given the second half of your question, which we'll go into in episode 158, there is a lot of anxiety and a lot of stuff going on that would naturally mean that it is taking up a lot of brain space. And if you do have a history of anxiety, and if you do have a history of, anything that's similar to me, your brain is kind of like, oh, we're feeling anxious about this. Let's solve this. Let's read all we can, I think that the problems that you're having are also contributing towards this kind of huge focus on polyamory. And I don't necessarily think it's a huge problem. So I think you should give yourself a little bit of grace. I think that this is something new. This is something that you're just getting into, and it's okay. if it does become a little bit of a focus. And it's okay if for a while, maybe all you read, like, I mean, there are worse things. Trust me. Like I honestly, one of my special interests at one time was true crime. And I am not even joking to you. I listened to, like, if you name a true crime podcast, I probably listened to every single episode of it. And I was also listening, like, on Audible to, like, the Big Book of Serial Killers. Like, it was, and I started to feel bad. Like, I started to feel a little bit depressed. And then I was like, oh, yeah, maybe it's all the murder that I'm listening to. And I had to stop myself. I actually had, like, now I really, maybe there's, like, I'll watch one true crime thing, maybe every other week, but I keep it low because I cannot, like, I get depressed. And I don't think that this is the case for you. Like, it's not becoming an interest that is causing you harm. Just keep an eye out on yourself and make sure, you know, I think a good sign, a good kind of red flag or kind of a stick of measurement to apply to almost anything. And this could be, you know, I also wanted to be careful around being interested in diet and nutrition because I've had a history of orthorexia, which is, if you're not sure what that is, basically it's kind of being obsessed with eating healthy to the point where it becomes slightly disordered. But actually, my new obsession with that was was not similar. And the way that I measured that and the way that I look at my special interests is this something I'm doing out of fear? And that's a big difference for me. So am I doing something because I'm trying to prevent something that I'm afraid of, or because I'm afraid if I don't do this that I will explode or something bad will happen? Like, that's a good measurement. Like, now I'm interested in nutrition, but I don't, you know, I can still eat a donut. Like, it's not a big, you know what I mean? Like, are you doing this out of fear? So if you're focused on reading everything because you think that it will prevent you from something terrible happening, or it involves fear in some way, then that's something that, you know, you need to talk with a therapist with and, like, break down. Maybe you need to, like, control what you're doing a little bit if it's causing you sadness and it's making you miserable, like my true crime special interest was doing. Then maybe that's worth looking at. But I think otherwise, yeah, to sum up, this is pretty typical and pretty normal of anyone who's interested in something new, especially for neurodiverse people. I wouldn't really give yourself a hard time about it. And there are other, like, bigger issues that I will go through whenever we talk about in 158, when we talk about the second half of your question. But yeah, more or less, like, give yourself a break. It's okay. I hope this helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 156 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. If you want to be awesome, you can sign up on the website to support me by going to nonmonogamyhelp.com/subscribe. There is a free tier if you want, and you'll get all the podcasts and the columns in your inbox every Friday. But if you want to be awesome, there's also a podcast support tier. My current podcast shout-out supporters are
Ermi, Mike Kander, and Matthias Caden.
If for whatever reason you can't support economically, there are things you can do. Like I said, there is a free tier. You can sign up to the emails that people get on Wednesdays before the columns go and the podcasts go live at nonmonogamyhelp.com/email. If you take a screenshot of the podcast and share it to your stories and tag, that would be really, really great. Also, like, obviously, if you get my books, that's really nice. You can also rate and review the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're really interested in my course, I am going to open enrollment. Enrollment is going to be limited because I want to be able to respond to the sort of assignments and questions and prompts that I give people in the course. And I want to be able to, you know, answer their questions. Like, I want them to be super supported. So it's going to be limited. But if you want to get notified when enrollment opens, if you go to polyamoryfasttrack.com, you can sign up to that email list. And then as soon as I open enrollment for everybody, I will be emailing everybody and letting everyone know. All right, that's all for this week. You'll get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight. The second part of this will be episode 158. So please, next week won't be the second part of this. But yeah, so the next part of this question from this person will be in episode 158. All right, thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. The music was done by Chris Albury Jones at albury-jones.com. Thank you for listening.